Hello and welcome to episode 21 of the Writing Talk podcast. And today, after a quick romp through my news, we'll crack on with the main topic of the show, which this week is all about how to avoid having an info dump in your writing. If you're not sure what an info dump is, stay with me and I'll explain all in a minute. We'll have a introduction to the new writing clinic feature that we're having, which kind of replaces a listener feedback function with a little bit of extra pizzazz thrown into that. And then we'll have the writer's toolbox, and that will be the end of the show. Welcome to the Writing Talk podcast, a show that helps you to build your skills as we go on our writing journey together. Okay, well, what have I been up to? Just quickly run through that. I've recently set one of my books called A Dark Assortment, which is a collection of short sort of dark stories, to being perma-free on Amazon. And since then, it's absolutely been flying off the virtual shelves. Had many as like 350 downloads in a single day. And for a while now, it's been the number one in the Kindle charts in the USA for short horror stories. Which is pretty big news for me. That's in the free chart, of course, which is separate to the paid bestsellers. Unfortunately, I haven't earned a cent from it, but it's really nice just to have it up there, getting all that visibility and new readers. I've also put a new cover on my book Trespass, the first full-length Darkling Stone novel. And if you're a regular listener to the show, you'll think, hang on, didn't he say he just did that the other day? And yeah, it has had a new cover recently, but I wasn't quite happy with it. It didn't still quite say what I wanted it to say. I had this sort of vision of what I wanted, and I kind of went for it. Now I think I finally nailed it. I think I'm really pleased with it. So I'll leave it there for a good old while, see how it goes. The only downside of it is that I'm now so pleased with the cover of the first novel that the next novel sort of now, suffers a bit by comparison. And I'm sort of already hunting around for that really great killer stock image to kind of upgrade the cover. Making your own covers isn't something I'd recommend to most people. You could probably save a lot of pain and get somewhere halfway decent by buying a pre-made book cover, which there are quite a few out there. You can shop around. I've seen some quite decent ones for sort of $50 around there. But I like to learn new skills, and I have a background in designing websites. So although websites are different from book covers, in many ways, there's a surprising amount of kind of common ground. They both have important ideas of composition, such things as proximity, which is how close things are to each other, the idea of a vertical rhythm and a balance. You've got to have careful use of typefaces, images, white space, backgrounds, textures, all sorts of things, come into both. So, but even having said that, my first attempts at homemade book covers, they weren't as hideous as some that I've seen, but they were pretty poor by comparison to some. So, okay, if you're not sure, I sort of skipped over, but if you're not sure what I mean when I say perma-free, and in this show I do like to go back because I don't want to exclude anybody who's new to this game. I always like to go back, so bear with me if this is obvious to you. But I thought what I'd do is I'd put that in the explanation of that in this week's Writer's Toolbox. So hang on to the end of the show and I'll be explaining all about perma-free and how to go about it. And if you're already 100% up on that, you can always stop listening, I guess. Okay, we'll crack on with the main topic, which is how do we avoid the dreaded info dump, so-called, in our writing? Well, first off, I'll just say I'm indebted to members of the new Writing Talk podcast Facebook group for suggesting the topic for this episode. So Nathan Middleton and Mark Harrison, thank you very much appreciated. And thank you to everyone who's joined the group so far. We're small, but I'm sure we'll grow. So do head on there and join if you want to. The idea is this writing clinic feature, I'll come on to this a bit more later, but the idea is if you have questions and concerns, you can raise them there, and we'll help each other out in the group. We're all kind of searching for a way forward. So it's not just, hopefully this whole podcast, I've got the idea across. I'm not lecturing here. It's, what I say is not necessarily always correct, but I hope to kind of challenge you a bit and make you think and give you something just to sort of chew on whilst you're looking for the way forward, which we all are. So If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future episode, head over to facebook.com/groups/WTP workshop. And of course, this link will be in the show notes on the website at writingtalkpodcast.com. And you request membership. And the idea is it's going to be a really supportive, welcoming group for writers of all abilities and all stages. So pop over and we'll be very glad to see you. Okay, so what is an info dump and why is it a problem if it is? Okay, an info dump is what people call it. It's typically when a writer gives in to that almost irresistible urge we all probably have to establish your characters, your scenes, your setting by writing a passage of exposition. Usually it's either to provide a backstory or to add a whole load of detail to a setting for the setting overall for the whole novel. So in science fiction, fantasy and speculative fiction, people often refer to an info dump as where people put their world building in, building up that level of detail to the context. But I think whatever the genre, all stories have some context or other. And as writers, we often feel like we've got to signpost everything and that we should all make it plain to everyone exactly what that context is. So you'd think that would be a good thing. So why do we always talk about an info dump as being a problem? Well, there are times when nuggets of a carefully selected information are absolutely vital to the progress of the story. Things that people really have to know or it won't make sense. Now, in those cases, a certain limited amount of exposition is necessary and the most efficient thing to do. Where it becomes a problem is that info dumps, so-called, tend to become quite protracted explanations. People find themselves sort of delving into the background and it almost feels as if the writer just doesn't know when to stop. I mean, if that happens in your first draft, it's not an issue. I mean, so long as you recognise it and you deal with it in the revision stages, it's really not a problem. It's kind of what the first draft is for. In fact, if you're listening to this programme because you know that the dreaded info dump is something that you struggle with, then well done. I mean, in writing, recognising your mistakes is probably the single most important step in making progress. It can be disheartening when you find yourself picking apart your precious work, but I really do urge you to soldier on through it. 'Cause whenever we learn something new, we go through a phase where we find everything a struggle. But with a bit of practice and a bit of persistence, we gradually internalise our new skills, so they become part of our thinking. And, that's how we improve and how we move on in all kinds of ways in life. And when you're writing, eventually you will iron out your difficulties and parts of it will become less laborious. Okay, but slightly getting off the topic, so we'll get back to the info dump. So I think it's a bit unfair to treat the info dump as a particular problem of science fiction and speculative fiction writers and fantasy writers. The way some people talk, you would think they were the only people who do this, but I think this problem happens with novels in every genre. I mean, if you're reading a romance, how many times have you seen this kind of thing where it seems like the writer has felt they have to explain, where the characters work, how they come to be there. They left their previous job at the factory because, they want to tell us about their educational history, how they did at school or whether they're a college dropout or whatever. All these things come in often quite near the beginning. And in literary fiction, how many times have I ploughed through endless pages where everything is kind of quite Freudian and all explained through their childhood experiences, it's all got to come into play, and they're all info dumps, really. And they can be, I think, very problematic. One of the main problems is that it absolutely slows the pace of your story right down. I mean, in fact, any exposition, no matter how small, does slow your pace a little. Also, and I think this is almost a bigger problem, really, is that the info dumps, they take your readers out of the moment. An info dump diverts the reader's attention away from the scene and away from the characters. So, in other words, it's doing exactly the opposite of what you want. I mean, you're probably giving detail if you find yourself doing this because you want to draw the reader in. You want to share this complex world or scenario that you've created. But what you're actually doing, I'm afraid, is pushing them away. And And if you add on top of that, I'm afraid this is the final insult to a lot of readers, is that passages of exposition are dull to read. I'm afraid they're just a bit boring. I think that's fairly universal. So, but what do we do about it? Okay. So in this discussion, I think we'll separate the two common causes of the info dump. One is the backstory issue, and the other one is the world building or providing a context issue. So thinking about that first backstory, I think if it seems to you that your readers will not understand your story without first hearing the backstory, then you probably have a fundamental problem with the structure of your piece, I'm afraid. I mean, this is a hard thing to say to you. It's a hard thing to accept, I know, because fixing a story structure can be hard work and it can take a while to get right. It can feel like you've got to sort of tear things up and go back to the drawing board. But look at it another way, because on the other hand, it can actually be very liberating to suddenly have that realization, because at least you know how to fix it. I mean, you probably have a passage that's been bothering you. And now finally just say, okay, this is actually, it's a structural problem. I need to redo it. I know I've endlessly tinkered over a scene, rewriting it over and over again, and until it gets to the point where, I'd rather do anything than work on my manuscript. It becomes very easy to sort of go and Google something. What was that thing I saw on TV last night? What am I having for dinner? Anything except go back and work on that scene again, because you just can't seem to get it right. I mean, at times like that, to me, it actually feels like quite a relief when a head palm moment, when I face palm, they say, don't they? Sorry, not head palm. Actually think, oh, that's what the problem is. It's a deeper problem. I need to go and, get down to the root of it and give it a more radical treatment. It's a bit like, repainting the wall, even though it's got rising damp. You're finding, okay, I'm just going to do it. And it won't be as bad as you think once you get started. Just get back there. And then at least the wall will be worth painting. So it'll be worth tinkering with once you've got the structure right. So given that, then how do you actually deliver your backstory? Well, the first thing to ask yourself, do your readers really want you to push all this backstory stuff on them near the beginning of your story? I mean, the answer's almost certainly no. The opening of your story should be the most gripping and engaging piece that you can possibly write. I mean, if your writing was a car and the opening of it should be a Formula One racing car, it's all about power, precision, maximum possible acceleration. That's all it is, nothing else. It's not about bells and whistles or what colour it is. There's absolutely nothing on a Formula One racing car that isn't 100% necessary. The whole vehicle is pared down to the absolute minimum. Every part must pull its weight. Think of it like that. If your opening scene doesn't work without exposition, then I'd like to suggest to you now that it probably should not be your opening scene. It might be better to start your story at an earlier point and write a scene that takes us into some action, rather than start somewhere else and then refer back to it. It's an easy trap to fall into. I've found myself doing it recently, sort of working in a backstory angle. But it's not the best way to do it. I mean, you could take that early action and sort of shoehorn it into a prologue, but again, probably not the best way. It might work for you. You could try and pull it off, but not everyone will read your prologue. So if it's that important, maybe you shouldn't risk it. And not everyone likes to start their reading experience by ploughing through a prologue. If you do it, keep it short and sweet. Don't make it wordy or over literary or, a bit too navel gazing. Crack on into the story. In which case, why not just call it chapter 1 and get on with it, It's okay, I think, for an introductory scene or an introductory chapter to take place in a different time or a different setting to get into that backstory angle. I think that's perfectly acceptable. We're all kind of programmed into this by watching many years of films, movies that sort of, they begin with a really good bit of action, sort of lots of things happening, and then suddenly that ends and we have the caption comes up 5 years later or 6 months later or something. That's a route to go down. If you do that, though, just watch out that your opening chapter that's delivering this backstory gets in, pulls its weight, does what it's meant to do, and then ends in a way that's self-contained. If you leave that introductory section with a cliffhanger or too heavy on the suspense element, your readers will end up disappointed because they'll read the next chunk and think, hang on, what's going on here? They'll feel a bit too wrong-footed and they'll be cross with you. So, as with anything, you've got to take a bit of care with this. You'll see if you browse around online, many people say, oh, just integrate it into dialogue. But that can work, but you've got to be very careful with it. I mean, I did touch on dialogue because the last episode 20, was all about dialogue, so you might want to go back and listen to that, see what you think. But briefly, how it's relevant here, what I was saying last week was dialogue between characters should be really natural and convincing. And in real life, people rarely explain the full details of anything to each other because there's usually some kind of shared understanding or, they haven't got time or whatever. But it's something you don't hear, that it comes across as some kind of really false lecturing kind of tone. And I just don't think that works. A similar idea to just trying to shoehorn it into a long bit of dialogue is the idea of sort of chucking in a new character who doesn't understand what's going on, so they have to have it explained to them, and there's often this happens and you'll see the writer then does quite a lengthy explanation from a more experienced character, the older person or whatever. The person who's been there longer comes along and says, oh, this is how it all works. Again, it can work and it's often done successfully, but you've got to keep it brief and punchy or it's just going to seem really clumsy. People don't tend to lecture each other and it comes across as really unnatural when you read it in a story. And on top of that, and this is kind of the clinching argument, it's actually a lot more intriguing to your reader if your more experienced character deliberately conceals certain bits of information. Straight away we're putting questions into the reader's mind. So when your inexperienced character asks a question about something, the more experienced person who knows what's really going on, presumably, kind of evades the question. They just sort of shrug it off or they look away or something like that, or they act shiftily in some sort of way. And we suddenly think, oh, what are they hiding? Why wouldn't they answer that question? What could be so bad that they won't even talk about it? And bingo, that's gold dust. That's what we want. By doing that, we just put the reader slap bang into the middle of our story. We've made them think like our character. We've got them hook, line and sinker. We've got them engaged. So, yes, use dialogue to deliver backstory, use inexperienced characters to deliver it, but keep everything as it pertains to backstory anyway. Strip it right down. Just deliver the tiniest amount at a time, kind of minimal amount that you can get away with. Readers don't like being told things. What they like is being given clues. I mean, I think that's why crime and mystery stories have always been so popular, because people like to try and solve the crime as they go along. They like that process of following along the clues, and being kept in suspense. As long as they're making progress as they go along, they don't mind the suspense continuing. And they like not knowing the outcome. I mean, in Conan Doyle's famous stories, which is the most engaging character? Is it Holmes, who keeps everything close to his chest, who famously hardly ever gives anything away and even misleads people when he feels like it? Or Watson, who needs everything spelling out for him? He's a bit more pedestrian, isn't he, as the sidekick? People are much more fascinated by Holmes, much more intrigued by what drives him, why is he all sort of dark and mysterious? And it's just the gaps that he leaves. He doesn't explain everything. Okay, how else can we deliver some backstory? Memories and recollections can work really well, so long as you've already drawn the reader in. I did this in my novella Breaking Ground. I held it back a little bit until in the first sort of few paragraphs I'd created a bit of a sense of mystery around the character, sort of, get people drawn in first. And I was quite reluctant to actually do this sort of, trip down memory lane thing, this recollection, but it was quite a short novella and it had a lot of work to do because it had to hook readers into a world that I'd already created in a full-length novel. So it was quite a tall order. Hopefully I kept it cut down enough that I managed to convey the information that was needed to the reader in a relatively interesting way. I hope so. Breaking Ground's free everywhere if you want to go download it. Or you can go to mikeycampling.com and sign up, and I'll email it to you. If you want to see if it works, grab it and read the first few pages and see there's a recollection there. And, again, I was slightly reluctant to do it, but I think I managed to make it work. I hope so. So what did I do, and what do I think kind of works if you're going to do a memory? Again, keep it pared down. Keep it a memory of action or a significant episode or a dramatic time. Don't have somebody just kind of remembering something faintly dull and long. I remember when my granddad used to tell me, that could be just kind of quite dull and, oh no, people think straight away, switch off. So don't be tempted to cheat and have someone recall an episode of dialogue, Again, the sort of, I remember when my mother used to tell me about this and that and the other, and you're kind of cheating, really. You're doing a bit of reported speech. It's the equivalent of putting a really long, pointless lecture in there. So if somebody's remembering some dialogue, make sure it's pithy, it's to the point, it's short. Make it pack a punch. Make it not explain everything again. Make it leave some doubt in the reader's mind. Leave some blanks in the recollection. Nobody remembers everything perfectly anyway. They remember the dramatic moments, So that's what we want. We want the dramatic moments just really quickly told in a recollection, and then leave the reader to it. Leave them some space to figure out. And it's okay for the reader to have questions. In fact, it's really, really good. I hope I'm getting that across. The more the reader's forming questions in the mind, then the more we've got them, The more they're using their own imagination, the more we're pulling them in. Okay, let's move on from the backstory idea to the idea of working in your world building and other ways of establishing the context for your whole story. Again, dialogue can be a really good way, can be a very effective way of getting the reader a bit of context, but you must be very tightly controlled with it. I'd suggest, this is a little bit difficult to explain from what I'm trying to say, but bear with me. Dialogue is really all about the interaction between the characters. So it's more about that interaction than it is about the topic of conversation, if you're with me. This is dialogue in fiction anyway. That might sound a bit sort of, psychoanalysis talk, but honestly, this is what I think to make your dialogue work well. It's really about the way they're saying it to each other and so on. So the way that they're actually conversing with each other is really important. So if I was talking to you face to face just now, you'd be watching my expression, you'd be listening to my tone of voice, you'd be interpreting my body language, you'd be picking up on verbal cues and so on. So in your subconscious, which is what we're trying to grab hold of on our reader, I would be the focus of your attention. And when you spoke to me, you would become the focus of my attention. So in many ways, the actual topic, that's kind of what we're talking about, kind of plays second fiddle to all the other interactions. So all these other things are like less conscious, but they're more important because those are the trigger points that we're trying to get hold of with our readers. Okay? So to get your content delivered, we need to be firing off all these trigger points and sparking people's imaginations. And the world building or the context, you kind of slip it in gently. Just sort of pop it in a bit sideways, Now, if that seems a bit vague, you think, what the hell is this guy actually talking about? If I just kind of talk through an example. So in my book Outcast, which is the second Darkly Stone novel, a significant amount of that action happens in the Neolithic period. So over 5,000 years ago. And in that story thread, I have a lot of the characters have a talisman, which they wear around their necks, and they feel it's a connection with the benevolent spirits, if I could say it, and it provides a certain amount of protection from the evil spirits. So it's an important thing to have. So early on in the story, sort of quite near the beginning, there's a conflict between a teenage boy who in this period is, pretty much a man, basically, and his older brother. And brothers, squabble and they fight. These guys have a fight. And then the younger brother deliberately gets his own back a bit. He antagonises his older brother. Which is typical, isn't it? Just as the older brother is about to go out into the dark forest to collect some firewood, the younger brother suddenly warns him, shouts out to him that he's forgotten his talisman. And the older brother is horrified. He's really taken aback, and he immediately checks that it's there. And the younger one, of course, is very happy that he's got his own back on his bullying older brother. So what the readers carried along with is that conflict. They like that. It's kind of thing they may have seen, from real life. They can imagine between, sibling sort of rivalry thing. That's what they're identifying with. That's what they're really following. And in amongst that, I've kind of slipped in the fact that these talismans are important, because otherwise the guy wouldn't have been so horrified. Okay, the fact that he was horrified and angry about it just shows that it was important. So later on, when I want to refer to those talismans, the reader's kind of primed. They already know they're important, and when I mention them, they sort of subconsciously, they're going to start paying attention to that information, if you see what I mean. Now, if in that beginning passage I'd launched into something, somebody says, oh, why do we wear the talismans? And somebody says, well, they provide us with this protection, and none of that was in that scene at all. It just wasn't there, and it would have killed it. There'd have been no engagement with that at all, just exposition. So I would say you want the same kind of approach. If you've got some kind of novel technology in your sci-fi book, or you've got a system of magic in your fantasy book, or whatever context you've created, because it could be contemporary or literary or anything, it all has a context. So for that context to be important to the reader, it needs to be something that is important to the characters. So you've got to mention it in such a way that it is relevant and important to your characters. On top of that, just try and remember, if your characters are familiar with the technology or magical system or whatever it is in your book, then that thing that's so novel to you and wonderful to you because you invented it, it will be pretty much invisible to them. If I asked to borrow your mobile phone, you wouldn't pause. So yes, it's very interesting. What you do is, this is how you work a touch screen. It's like this, and you don't have to press it hard. It's just, and this is an icon, and so on. You wouldn't do a lecture on that, and you certainly wouldn't mention what CPU it had inside or anything like that. Because we've all got them and they're all more or less the same. You just say, oh yeah, sure, here, yeah. And we often use abbreviations and pet names for things that we're very familiar with as well, and it comes across as very false if you spell everything out, or your characters do. So in our house, we have a digital video recorder, as I'm sure lots of people have these days. We just call it the box. You say, is there something on the box? Shall we record it on the box? That's just what we call it. Don't want to call it a PVR or something. That just sounds ridiculous. A minute ago, I used the phrase mobile phone, and that's because of my age. I call it that, but my children, I grew up with corded phones. My kids wouldn't call it that. I'm sure they just call it a phone, because the idea of a corded phone to them is weird. It's so it's my phone. You call me on my phone or whatever. So I think the idea of characters spelling things out to each other, it's just a bit, it's a bit silly. It doesn't ring true. Does that mean that all your wonderful and careful research and world building that you did was a waste of time? Absolutely not at all. For one thing, it was absolutely vital for you to know what you were doing in your world, in your context, in order to write your story with some confidence. To make a good job of it, you've got to have some sort of self-belief in that story and in the world that it's in the context of it. But some of your preparation was exactly that, preparation. And if it doesn't pull its weight in terms of the story, then it doesn't deserve to be included in the final draft. So I'm afraid it may sound a bit harsh, but one of the biggest roadblocks to your progress is your inability to cut out the dross. We all do it, everybody, I'm sure, writes dross, and at some point or other, especially in the first draft. And if you can tell yourself, hey, it's just typing, the sky won't come crashing down if I delete that paragraph. If it hurts too much, copy and paste it to another. I have a file I often call outtakes, and I just copy and paste stuff into there. I don't feel so bad then, It's at least it's there. You kind of think, oh, it's there if I ever need it, and of course you never do. But at least it's taken stuff out that's unnecessary. Cut it. Your work will be better, you'll improve faster. You just let it shine, let the real story shine through by getting anything that's in the way. And for me, writing a story is all about teasing the reader. It's a kind of a subtle mind game. So give them just enough to keep them wondering what happens next. So we need to keep your readers on the edge of your seat. If people will say, this is a really great book, I was on the edge of my seat all the time, I couldn't stop turning the pages. How do we get to that wonderful state? We keep them in doubt. We keep them turning the pages. I mean, we have to keep them wondering what on earth is going to happen. Because the moment that they feel they know exactly how it's going to end and how everything's going to play out, they'll just lose interest. They might stop reading altogether. So first job is not to tell them everything, quite the reverse. Your first job is to keep stringing them along. And once you've got them following, then and only then can you gently drop little snippets of your world building into the story as you go. You'll gradually reveal that context. Okay, bit more on world building, introducing that context. It's a common idea to try and, it's kind of as a literary device, to build your world building information in by having the main character inexperienced and innocent. I have mentioned this a bit in the backstory idea as well. It kind of covers both. You have a character who's a child or an apprentice or somebody who's new to that area or whatever. As a plot structure device, it works really well. It's been used many times. The classic hero's journey type of story. So it works in terms of plot structure, but it's not the ideal way to deliver the context. It can seem clumsy to try and set the scene through that kind of explanation. We've all seen it. The young person trails around in the wake of a wizard or a magician or a captain of the starship or the CEO of a company or whatever, and the young person is there and they're asking all sorts of foolish questions, and they then patiently endure it whilst the superior person gives them these long explanations. And it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? People like tropes up to a point, but they kind of switch off with cliches. Oh yeah, I've seen it all before. Why bother reading it? If the mentor in the story, the sort of mentor figure, is so powerful, important, then how come they have the time to stand around explaining everything to their young apprentice or their trainee or whatever? I mean, it doesn't seem realistic. It doesn't ring true. I mean, it's more like this superior being will kind of sweep in, deliver some orders, sweep out again, and without feeling the need to explain themselves in any way at all. I mean, that is how people seem to behave when they've worked their way up to a position of authority, isn't it? Unfortunately, the very last thing they want to do is to stand around explaining themselves because they feel too self-important to do that. So if we go with something a bit more that rings true like that, that can be a really nice opportunity. So instead of your inexperienced character asking lots of silly questions and being given long explanations, have them, sent off to try something difficult and they fail at it. And you kind of think, oh, yeah, well, the boss has set them up to fail, haven't they? I can identify with that. Of course, we all do. We immediately sympathise with a character in that situation because we've all been in that kind of situation. I mean, just think how well this works in like the Harry Potter books. I mean, although, Harry and his friends are going to win out in the end, they do seem to spend most of the story making mistakes. They've got these people with all these supposedly wonderful teachers, and yet the kids go out and try things, and usually it goes wrong quite drastically at first. The spells backfire, or sometimes they go off and try something on their own, and they look it up and they work it out, and then it doesn't. It seems to work, and then it has all these unforeseen consequences, and is causes a bit of chaos they've then got to escape from, and no one ever seems to provide Harry Potter with all the information he needs. Somebody might give him a cryptic note, but they never seem to give him an instruction manual. Now, so that seemed a funny turn of phrase to me, and all the Harry Potter fans go, oh, he did actually get an instruction manual on page 37 of book 5. Well, I'm sorry if he did, but you know what I mean. Figuratively speaking, he's usually left pretty much in the dark, as a lot of people in gripping stories are. And I think that's why people like Harry Potter, the main character. They identify with him so much. He's got to figure everything out for himself. And, we've all been there. We've all we all have those experiences that in our minds that they've shaped us as individuals. And if you talk to people, what are those experiences? They'll tell you that it was a time when they were challenged, things they had to face, difficulties that they had to overcome. Because we know that they're important to us, they're important to the readers, and they empathise and they engage with those. Okay, on with the writing clinic feature. So how's it going to work? Well, do you have something in your writing, some aspect of your craft that you would like some help with? I mean, we probably all have. So please head on over to the Facebook group. The link is facebook.com/groups/WTP workshop. Last bit's all one word, of course. And request membership. And as soon as you've joined, you can take part in the discussions there, and you can post things there and so on. And you should see a thread. I'm going to try and keep this up. Hopefully other people can help with this as well. It's date. I'll try and put a date on it. There's one there at the moment. And that post will be like this week's writing clinic post. And the idea is you can comment on there, and then I'll see it. And we can not only take that then as a discussion point for the podcast. So, you kind of get everything that I can bring, everything I can research and find out for you and deliver in the podcast. But also we can help each other out. So there can be discussion on there, and, just by helping each other out, a bit of mutual support, that would be fantastic. I mean, anything is kind of up for discussion, but it's not a place for promotion. It's not really good for that, I'm afraid. That would just ruin the whole group. So meet like-minded writers, engage in a bit of productive chit-chat, a nice positive environment. We'll have, there's no question too silly or too small, and any kind of help and encouragement is really valuable. And you might also, like there was a couple of guys, Nathan and Mark earlier, you might get a shout out in the show as well. So that's how that's going to work. So there isn't kind of a theme yet. The idea is more that rather than me saying something, let's talk about this, that's going to come from the audience. So head on over to the group, join in the group and post in there, and then we'll see what we can do to help each other out. Okay, for this week's Writer's Toolbox, I'm going to do a run through on perma-free, on what it is, how to set it up, and how it can be good for you. If you already know all about it, then you can always, skip to the end sort of thing, but I'll just kind of run through it quite quickly. So we'll assume you don't know anything about it. So Amazon's publishing platform, Kindle Direct Publishing, usually referred to as KDP for short. In that, on KDP, they don't allow anyone to set a book to have a permanent price of zero. So, I mean, they probably don't want the store taken over by free books because, after all, they did separate the free book charts from the paid bestseller lists. They do allow books to be set for free for a few days at a time, so long as they're in the KDP Select scheme, i.e. those are books that they're exclusively sold on Amazon, and they can be borrowed for free by subscribers to Kindle Unlimited and borrowed by members of Amazon Prime. If you're a Prime member, you can borrow a book a month, I think. But those free days for KDP Select titles are limited. You only get 5 days in total in a 90-day period. So how is it that you see some books being set to being permanently free, or perma-free, as it's often called for short? Okay, well, here's how you go about it. So first, you've got to check very thoroughly that your title isn't already enrolled in KDP Select. If it is, then that's a deal breaker. You don't upset Amazon. You've got to wait until that term has run out. You can find that in your KDP dashboard. There's something you can click on that tells you your KDP Select information. Make a note of the date when it ends. And there is a tick box, which if it's ticked, it will actually, each time it runs out, it will re-enroll automatically. So a kind of rolling subscription, unless you untick that. So watch out for that. So you've got to wait till it's safely at that program. Amazon will be cross if they find out that you're trying to cheat on this. So once you've made sure your book isn't in KDP Select and it's all safely, ready to be sold everywhere else, then you've got to go and publish that book onto other platforms such as Barnes & Noble, Kobo, iBooks, all these platforms, there are others available, but all of them allow books to be permanently free right from the outset. A good way of doing that is to go over to draft2digital.com, and that's a number 2, a digit 2 in the middle, so draft 2 digital. And with them, it's very easy to publish your book to several platforms all at once. And Draft2Digital will allow you to set the price to 0 right from the outset. So you publish it there. And when you're sure it's gone up, you go and visit Kobo and iBooks and things. You see your book there. You see it says free on it. Copy that link, for your product page on the other store. If you're not sure, I believe iBooks is a good one to use. Then go over to your KDP dashboard where you publish your books, where your bookshelf is. Scroll down to the bottom and look for the old Contact Us link. Follow that through. That is a little process to follow through. Tell them it's about your, I think one of the areas is pricing actually, and explain in your message that you'd like them to price match your book and that your book is free on other platforms. Give them the ASIN number of your book on Amazon. Give them the full title accurately, and then give them the link that you've just copied from the other store. So whether it's on iBooks, whatever, where your title's free, and then ask them really nicely to price match it, because Amazon do not have to do this. It is at their discretion, and they'll always tell you that. But just say, ask them nicely. So grateful for your help in making this price matching and making this book free on the Amazon stores. But you might even like to say, because this is like a sales funnel, and I'm trying to make my book more discoverable, or perhaps it's the first in a series and so on. You're trying to drive sales of future books. Make them see there's something in it for them. I've never had them turn me down. Just ask them nicely. Some people will say that you should try this sort of trick of getting everybody to go on, visit your book on the Amazon store, and there's a link on there that says tell us about a lower price, and get loads of people to click on there and put a link to your book somewhere else. But I mean, that's a bit of a rigmarole. I've always contacted the support people at KDP, and they're fairly prompt and helpful with a day or two. Provided you've given them everything correctly, they'll just do it, and they'll email and show you, so your book's permanently free. Bob's your uncle. It's just ask. It's easier. It's up to their discretion, but I think if you ask nicely, they're likely to help you out. Later on, if you change your mind, I wouldn't recommend you sort of jiggering about this all over the place. If it's going to be perma-free, that should be for a good while. But if you do need to put the price up later, just contact KDP again and explain, and I'm sure they'll help you out. And at the same time, you probably ought to put the price up to match that on the other platforms as well. Otherwise, it's a bit going to be a bit confusing, and they might price match it again and go back to free. It can sometimes be less than smooth. I've heard some people say that things have gone wrong with this, but I think just keep in touch with them. Keep in touch with the support at KDP, and they will help you out. Okay, I hope that all makes sense. I was going to tell you why it's good. Well, just really for the visibility. If you're relatively unknown and you want to get some people into you as an author and perhaps into a series, then having a perma-free title can help. I mean, some people say, it doesn't really help, it doesn't help. But if you're getting a bunch of downloads, you're getting your book onto people's Kindles, it's a bit of a numbers game. I think if enough people are downloading that free book and it starts to rank well in the free charts, there can be a downside, but it can lead to some good reviews and, a bit more popularity, a bit of word of mouth and so on. Some people say there could be a downside. People aren't committed to it. They might not read it because they didn't pay for it. And that can be true. And sometimes people will give poor reviews for a book, even though it's free. I mean, in a perverse kind of way. I don't know. I think Horses for Courses, it could be worth a try in your genre. It's certainly, in that horror short stories, it certainly catapulted my visibility in that ranking. And later on, perhaps if I have another book that's in that same genre, that would be nice and that could benefit from that connection. At the moment, it was a book that wasn't doing a huge amount, even when priced at 99 cents. So you kind of think, well, it's just sitting there doing nothing, slipping down the ranks, make it perma-free, see what happens. And as it was, it worked out really well. So that's what it can do for you. It can boost your visibility overall, get some eyes seeing your name, get your book downloaded onto lots of Kindles and so on. Okay, I'll finish off there. It's always great to have your support, so thank you very much for listening. If you found it useful, please do go along and subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or something like that, or on Spreaker, or even on the website at writingtalkpodcast.com. There's masses of show notes there, really full show notes there, and any links to useful resources and so on. And there's a Facebook group we'd love to see over there. And if you could share around the podcast a bit, that would be fantastic. If you want to tweet about it, if you want to put it on Facebook and so on, that would be absolutely wonderful and very much appreciated. But the very main thing is that you keep writing, keep scribbling, keep tapping away at the keys, and above all, whilst you're doing it, please keep smiling. Thank you and goodbye.